Action. Budd Hopkins, thanks for stopping by and giving us your time.
Thank you.
Budd, you're actually by profession an artist, correct? And we're probably curious, most of the viewers would be curious as to how that would qualify you as a serious UFO investigator, specifically in the field of abductions.
Well, I'm involved in a field where there's very little that can absolutely qualify anybody to do this kind of work. Since I've had no special training, I admit to that instantly, all I can claim is to be open-minded, I would hope intelligent, and skeptical in working with people. And I think that the only special gift an artist might have is some kind of maybe even slightly cynical insight into what people say, skeptically careful, and the last thing anybody wants, if you're an abstract artist, the last thing you want is to be written off as someone who accepts whatever anybody says, because you have to maintain some sort of critical approach to life, otherwise you might as well give up the whole thing. And so even though I've had no special training, I think that just common sense and carefulness and so forth does give me some qualification.
Okay. Now, many of the cases that you investigate require regression hypnosis, right? Now, is that something you are certified to carry out, or do you work with other professionals?
My history of getting into hypnosis was that in the first 7 years of my investigating these cases, I did none of the hypnosis myself. I brought the particular witness to a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, even in one case a police hypnotist, to do the hypnosis. So I sat through 7 years of watching other people's techniques. I had probably the world's longest apprenticeship at hypnosis of anybody I know. When I started doing it myself, I had some of the same psychiatrists, therapists, psychologists, and so forth sitting in on my sessions and giving me some kind of advice. And my training is essentially those 7 years of observation and apprenticeship, and then having other people come in later on and sitting in on my sessions. In terms of some sort of getting accreditation somewhere,
right.
I have been deluged with people offering me accreditation under their quote-unquote authority. All I had to do was to pay so many $100, and for 2 days I would be accredited. Well, I haven't done that yet, but I have full confidence in my abilities at this, and the fact that I've had so many different people sit in on my sessions, I have no doubt about the fact that I feel fully trained and fully capable.
So in lieu of any kind of certification, you can always rely on the testimony of your peers?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
But doesn't that become sort of an issue for skeptics when they examine your work?
Everything is an issue for skeptics. Anything. The point is that having been and still being all my life an artist, that's already an issue for a skeptic. Well, he's an artist. What does an artist know? So I don't think that if you devote your life to jumping through skeptical hoops to accommodate their every problem they raise, you will only find that there are more hoops and more problems that they will raise later on. And I just, I don't have enough time left in my life to worry about it.
Over the past, actually with the publication of your books and the books by Whitley Strieber and various other folks who are now involved with abduction experiences, the public awareness has certainly been heightened.
No doubt.
Does that give you some difficulty sometimes with folks who come to you having sincerely believed they've been abducted, yet probably haven't?
There's no doubt that the problems have been greater for all of us. We can't possibly deny that the more information there is out in the public domain, the more difficult it is for us, because people do come equipped with knowledge. That means that we have to be even more careful, that we have to refine our techniques so that we're able to test the veracity of people more subtly than ever before. And I think this has probably, in a certain sense, strengthened us rather than weakened us.
Is there a specific technique that you use to try to define who the, say, copycats are?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, there are many different aspects to the technique, really. It's a collection of methods. The first thing is that in the initial interviews, you try to find out everything you possibly can find out about that person's life, which would indicate whether or not this person is a productive member of society, involved in relationships, holding a job, a person who would have no obvious motivation to present himself or herself as a liar, you know, in other words, lying to claim something, to want some kind of a goal. You first put a person through that kind of interview with the idea that you may be wrong, but you ask as many questions as possible. And you only take the cases of which you feel pretty certain. So you're self who you work with. The next step is that when you do the interview initially and interviews, and when you do hypnosis, you find ways to test that person's veracity through false leads, through false suggestions. And I don't want to go into this because this is technically something that is better that the public not be aware of, but I will give you a simple example, a very simple example.
Fine.
Supposing you're dealing with a small child, and let's say the child is 6. This has nothing to do with hypnosis or anything. One doesn't do hypnosis with children. I never have and never would. Let's say the child is 6, and the child is telling you a very convincing account of an abduction experience. I mean, they don't call it that, but these little men came in, they were floated out of the room, this and that happened. Very frightened, lots of signs of fear after the event. They don't want to sleep in their room. You know something about the family. You've interviewed both parents, and you have a lot of reason to believe that this child is telling the truth. So when I go over the event with the child, I will say something like this to a 6-year-old, say, well, when they first took you into the white room that you have described, this is after the fact, the child has described all this, I said, this is very important, very important. What did they give you to eat? They always give you something to eat. And of course, they never give you something to eat. If the 6-year-old is making it up, it's going to be, well, we had M&Ms, we had pizza, something. But in every case, when you have followed it this far, because you do feel the child is telling the truth and has been traumatized, and the parents' acceptance of their child's story and their own experiences leads you to accept it. Every child says to me, they didn't give me anything to eat, very angry, like I got left out. Mm-hmm. But that's a very homely, small example of what you can do in an extremely subtle level with adults. So you have to check at every step of the way. There is no abductee who is really a wannabe abductee who I've ever run into is that thoroughly informed on this, that they're not aware of issues that turn up that I'm aware of that they're not aware of, because I've at this for so long. So one is constantly internally testing this.
We're starting to understand that the abduction phenomenon is, in fact, of a global nature. Probably you're one of the guys we should ask about this. How do cases of alleged alien abduction compare cross-culturally?
Very good question. What I have found, and I've dealt with people all over the world, actually, what I have found is that the description of the events, the nature of the craft that they're taken into, the physical examination, physical procedures, appearance and stuff are universally the same. What differs is the local interpretation that's given to this. When I worked in a couple of cases in Turkey with people who were followers of Islam, they had the interpretation when they were little children that these were the jinns, you know, the mischievous spirits who came into people's lives and carried on. They had no problem with what this was because they put it in that particular framework. The mother would get out the Quran, they would read prayers, they would read the Quran and pray and so forth. In Africa, it's a different thing. It's the ghosts of the ancestors, if it's an ancestral religion, even though we're dealing with white-faced, small figures in silver suits or something. If you're looking into this with religious people, say Christian fundamentalists, these are demons or in some cases angels or whatnot. The point is the description physically of what they go through and what they see is universal. The interpretation depends upon the particular cultural context.
Now, Dr. Michael Persinger, I believe, would contest that. He's the fellow who puts electrodes on folks' heads, gives them a little jolt into their frontal lobe, and elicits some kind of quasi-spiritual state. How do you respond to what he's doing as it relates to the alien abduction phenomenon?
Well, first of all, we have all of these situations where the person is physically missing, it's taken away. Maybe it's a 2-month-old baby. The police are called. The person is missing. That has nothing to do with electrodes on somebody's head or what they see or think. What happened to the person? Where were they during this missing time? You have 6 people who have the same experience. They're all in a car at the same time. You have post-traumatic stress disorder across the board with these same 6 people afterwards. This has nothing to do with what Persinger turns up with, which is essentially, I felt a presence. Well, which of us hasn't felt a presence? I mean, there might be somebody behind me standing right now, peering at the back of my head. I don't feel that. But the point is, we all have weird little odd intuitions which are soft. And one thing that's extremely important is that I get attacked by skeptics on this ground. They will say, well, when people come to you, they feel that they have had an abduction experience or they wouldn't have come to you. True. And they feel that somehow you will be receptive. True. I'll at least listen. So therefore, everything that I'm running into must be discounted. Persinger is objective, quote unquote. Now, Persinger is the star professor at his university. He's on television. Everybody knows his university in Canada. So a student, quote unquote, student, depended upon his peers and his superiors and his professors for grades and support, comes to Persinger, the student. And he knows, he's seen him on television, he knows all about this. He goes into this chamber, they hook up some things, and he finally comes out and says, I felt I was floating, I felt a presence, and I saw little gray people with black eyes. Persinger says, see? And I say, see? He is getting people who know what to say to him to please him.
So it's back.
He is never attacked for that. I'm attacked for it.
But there's an interesting parallel then. You will be accused of leading witnesses to certain conclusions under hypnosis, yet the same influence that he exerts on his students or subjects goes unremarked.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you see, in my situation here, I try to lead them again and again, but always away from what I know the pattern is. And I don't think that he necessarily tries to lead them, but when they come out of his chamber, and this is Professor Persinger at our university, and he says, "What did you see?" And he says, "Well, you know, I saw little gray guys with black eyes." No one questions that, you know, for a second, and yet it should be patently obvious that a student at that university, this is not a blind test.
Right.
Plus the fact that there have been people who've come to him, one of whom I talked to about his experience, and they put the electrodes. He didn't float. He didn't see anybody. He didn't see any. He came out kind of a little confused, but he didn't see anything. But this has nothing to do with the physical evidence. I mean, what if you have an abduction case where the neighbors report this object in somebody's backyard with lights on it? In the morning, the tree branches have been snapped from the top down where that object was seen. There's a mark on the ground where the grass has been killed. The child was missing from the crib for 3 hours. The police were called, etc. What does that have to do with Persinger? None of those things can be accounted for by him. We all have known that ever since probably the 1930s that neurosurgeons could activate certain places in the brain, people could hear music, etc. This is not a new thing. So I think that essentially, even though some of his research might be interesting, I think it's totally irrelevant to the UFO phenomenon.
So in essence, while he's giving us some interesting insight into the operations of the frontal lobe, it doesn't necessarily follow that he's explaining anything about abduction.
Absolutely.
Okay, now, as a researcher, are you still involved in offering support groups for experiencers?
This is a sort of a hitting a guilty button for me. I try to do as much as I can with this, but it's been a long time since I've been able to do a support group. I work with people, I put them in touch with each other, but to do this, obviously, this out of our own time, our own money, our own even presenting, doing the phone calling, the arranging, and the refreshments and so forth. I want to be doing it more than I'm doing it, and I've done it for years and years. I've done it for 20 years, but not as frequently as I should, and I'm remiss about this, but this is still one of the major goals we have.
Now, isn't there a danger, though, in a support group that you may have a member who may not have actually had a bona fide experience being, in a sense, given some validity and reinforcing a misconception about an experience, and that's not really, in essence, helping that person? Could that happen, and what would you do to sort of guard against that?
Well, certainly, any kind of support group of any sort, let's talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever, any kind of support group runs that risk, where people who maybe are not as afflicted can somehow see themselves and enjoy being a victim in some way or other. That can happen anywhere. I mean, so this isn't just unique to the UFO situation. How does one try to offset that? First of all, you have to think, what are the advantages to the basic group people who turn up and look into this, weighing that as opposed to the disadvantages that there might be somebody who is a wannabe who will acquire information which he or she then can use to that risk. There's no way what any of us do is risk-free, just as there is nothing that a skeptic can do that's risk-free. A skeptic attacking these people can make all of their problems infinitely worse. Obviously, if we support somebody in what is a delusion, that's a difficult thing too. The skeptic would say, well, that's far worse because we know these things are always delusions. They never happen. So therefore, it's kind of a circular reasoning. what one has to do, and this is a basic rule we have, is we try to not talk about the UFO experience that one has at a support group. What we try to talk about are issues that are everyday experiences that people have who've had abduction experiences. For instance, how do you handle going to doctors and dentists? Just to take a basic issue. Well, abductees very frequently, but not totally, but frequently have trouble putting themselves in the passive state of being examined and so forth, treated by a doctor or dentist. How does one get around that? These can be really very large problems for people. Well, that's not feeding a lot of information to the wannabe, quote unquote, that we're worried about here. This is basically a life issue. How do you talk to people at work about your experiences? How do you figure out who to tell, etc.? The kinds of issues that I try to stress are real life, everyday experiences of getting along with your loved ones, co-workers, and so forth. We don't sit there and say, and I ban this kind of talk. Well, the aliens I saw had little buttons over here with the blah, 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 so that the person can then say, oh, I saw little buttons. We don't talk about that. I don't want that ever discussed because we don't want to feed data, so to speak. But we can talk about everyday emotional issues. It still is possible that a wannabe could glom onto that and say, yeah, I have trouble going to the dentist too, and so on and so forth. But the point is, the amount of good that comes from these experiences, the shared sense of having a lot of trouble in the real world getting along with certain issues, and the mutual support, which every support group wants to do, far outweighs the dangers as far as I'm concerned.
Let's flip that one around a little bit too and examine the possibility that you have a wannabe who's actually conducting and organizing the support group. Is there some danger in that as well?
Absolutely. That's a big danger. Yeah.
How do we defend against that?
You see, we're in a situation where all of us doing this work are, let's say, in a kind of embattled position. We're under siege. The skeptics are out there saying we're doing this out of our own goodwill and caring and free. I mean, there's no money, The skeptics are saying these people are doing terrible harm, et cetera, et cetera. We have to face that at every moment. We're also aware that there are people who could, for psychological reasons, and I could name a few myself right now, who, but won't, who are probably doing a great deal of harm working with abductees for a lot of different reasons. And we have no we have no self-policing system that works. There's no kind of accreditation. There's no sense of power that any of us have over anybody else, really. And therefore, we're in a certain sense helpless to prevent certain kinds of bad things happening. Just as I have no way of preventing an arch debunker from getting people in a room and saying, you did not have that experience. You are mentally sick, that's how you got, or you lied or something. I can't protect those people from getting that kind of attack, which is, as we all know, it's as if the prosecutor is saying to or the defense lawyer is saying to the rape victim, you were not raped, you made it up. I can't defend that woman against that particular kind of defense lawyer. We have no power. And we're very aware of the problems that exist. If this were, a fair and equitable world, things would be a lot different. But we have no power, and we're certainly aware that those problems which you brought up are very real.
Okay, that about sums up my questions for you, and I again want to thank you for joining us here and giving us your time.
Thank you. Thank you.